Bueno, buenos días a todos. Vamos a comenzar con la sesión... Bueno, como había dicho, buenos días a todos. Vamos a comenzar con la sesión general del Hospital Marqués de Valdecilla. Este turno nos corresponde a la organización al Hospital Virtual Valdecilla y tengo el privilegio de tener un gran ponente hoy. Entonces, Nacho del Moral, el director del Hospital Virtual, nos va a hacer una pequeña semblanza de Matt. Cuando quieras, Nacho.
Buenos días a todos. No está encendido el micrófono. Sí que está. Perfecto. Buenos días, voy a presentaros a Matt Weinger, que va a darnos hoy la sesión del hospital. Matt es anestesiólogo y es ingeniero biomédico en la Universidad de Vanderbilt, en Nashville, en Tennessee. Y Matt siempre en su labor profesional se ha preguntado acerca de cómo mejorar los resultados de los pacientes a través del rediseño de los sistemas de salud. Matt es catedrático de Anestesiología y de Educación Médica, allí en la Universidad de Vanderbilt, y además es director del Centro de Investigación e Innovación en Sistemas de Salud, de CRISS Center, en Vanderbilt. Matt ha publicado pues alrededor de 200 artículos en revistas internacionales y más de 70 becas, a todas alrededor de la reingeniería de procesos, la seguridad de paciente, el factor humano, la educación médica y el bienestar de los profesionales. Además tenemos el privilegio en Valdecilla, en el Hospital Virtual Valdecilla, de estar trabajando con Matt. Está con nosotros como investigador senior y tenemos 3 proyectos en los que estamos juntos desarrollando aquí en Valdecilla. Uno alrededor del bienestar de los profesionales, otro alrededor del rediseño de procesos utilizando el factor humano y luego la simulación médica. Hoy nos va a hablar sobre nuevos enfoques que han desarrollado en su centro de investigación y de innovación y que están aplicando para la mejora de la seguridad del paciente en los diferentes proyectos que están desarrollando. Además, Matt está aprendiendo español, aunque la sesión va a ser en inglés. Y le encanta vivir con nosotros y creo que se va a quedar aquí en España. Thank you, Matt.
Gracias Nacho por la introducción agradable. Hoy quiero hablarles sobre la seguridad del paciente y clínico y describir algunos de los últimos conceptos. Desafortunadamente todavía no hablo español lo suficientemente bien, así que continuar en inglés. So, my goal today for you is by the end of this talk, you will be able to do 2 things. Explain to those who missed out on this great opportunity 5 key concepts in patient safety, and describe how you, as a clinician or an administrator or even a researcher, can contribute nearly every day to improving patient safety. So I want to start by giving you a little history. Like all other hospitals throughout the world, this hospital is interested in and trying to improve patient safety. And in fact, patient safety has been something of concern going back to the earliest days of medicine, from the Greeks to the British, etc. But really modern patient safety started practically with the 1999 Institute of Medicine report, To Err is Human, which is shown there. And it claimed that there were 44,000 to almost 100,000 preventable deaths in the United States And this was a public and political wake-up call to do something more about patient safety. And as a result, patient safety became a higher priority in most hospitals, first in the developed world and then in the developing world. And hospitals and governments made significant investments in research and practice, so there were many patient safety initiatives, both locally in hospitals and clinics, and at national level and even globally, like the World Health Organization. And another thing that happened that's kind of important is that safety became integrated with quality improvement, which already had established role. And this has affected, in my opinion, the ability of safety to make progress. So the question is, in the last 25 years, are we better off? And there are many people who say that, yes, we've made a little bit of progress, but new sources of unsafety have arisen, and overall, there's not been a lot of progress, certainly not as much as people would like. And so in 2015, there were 4 separate international consensus reports independently saying that there was minimal evidence of substantial improvement, only minor improvement, despite everything we've done. And recently, a few years ago, there was a meta-analysis with 70 studies involving 340,000 patients that showed a 5 to 7% incidence of preventable harm. And this number isn't much different than it was before the Institute of Medicine report 30 years earlier. So if you're interested in reading more about this, there's a book by Robert Wares and Kathleen Sutcliffe called Still Not Safe, and they make the argument not only that we aren't any safer, not everyone agrees with that, but the reasons why we're probably not safer. And one of them is this intermingling of quality improvement and safety. So that's our history. Okay, so what currently are the major patient safety issues? Whether there's medication-related harm, healthcare-associated infections, surgical complications, wrong or delayed diagnosis, falls and other injuries to patients and clinicians, harm related to the use of medical devices and software, misidentifying patients, and all of those are the same list as we had in 1999. Maybe the order, the frequency, the severity is a little bit different, but we have all the same problems still. And a new problem is clinician burnout and eroded well-being, which affects both the safety of patients and the safety of clinicians. So with that as a foundation, I want to present to you a framework that will allow hospitals, clinics, and individuals to move forward to create safer work environments for themselves and for their patients. We're going to talk about 5 concepts. Focus on events, not errors. Focus on contributors, not causes. Focus on success as well as failure. Speak up to prevent drift towards failure. And redesign systems, don't fix people. And I'm going to cover each of these individually so you'll see them again, and then we'll review at the end in case you've missed something. So let's start with the first concept. We want to focus on events and not errors. Now, to understand this, we have to go back to what's called the traditional view of safety. This was the view that was widely held and used before the Institute of Medicine report and is still common today. Okay? The focus is on clinicians making errors. So the sharp end, we'll see this again, is where the care happens. And so people at the sharp end are the clinicians, the nurses and doctors who take care of patients, and others who do that. So here's the mental model, the conceptual model of the traditional view. Humans make errors. Errors cause harm. If humans were only better, they'd make fewer errors and care would then be safer. So if you believe this approach, by the way, I'm happy to share my slides through Hector, and then you can have a copy if you want. As a result of this, we need to fix the unreliable human. So only if if those doctors and nurses taking care of patients made fewer errors, then care would be safer. And we generally, the way you know that that's the viewpoint is that most of the things about safety are rules and require procedures and require policy and safety training and new technology like decision support or dispensing systems to get the human out of the system. And further, when someone makes an error that causes harm, they are targeted. They're blamed for the error and shamed and retrained and sometimes fired. Okay, so why is this not a good approach? Well, errors are inevitable. They happen to everybody every day. You forget your keys. You forget something. Jose forgot something this morning. I know. I don't know what it was, but errors are essential. We don't know if our performance is what we want unless we see a signal between what we wanted to see and what actually happened. Okay? Errors are highly context dependent. What is an error in one situation is success in another. So the situation determines what's error and what is not. Errors rarely cause harm. The vast, vast majority of errors have nothing to do with patient harm because they're caught. No one wants to harm patients, and no one likes to admit their errors. So focusing on errors is fundamentally counterproductive. It suppresses reporting, and it fails to get at the underlying issues that are causing the problems to everybody, not just in that one event. So there's now a new view of safety which focuses on events and systems. And here the mental model is safety is a system property. It's a function of the system. And all systems contain failure modes that contribute to events. And what clinicians do every day is try and prevent these failure modes from causing harm to patients. So the alternative viewpoint from patients cause harm is from clinicians cause harm to clinicians create safety. So the result is you focus on fixing the flawed processes and the flawed systems. So I'm going to spend a minute talking about a way to think about events that happen in the hospital. So for a given patient, let's say a cancer patient comes in to have palliative surgery, they have an optimal care path. That doesn't mean that you're going to make them healthy and make their cancer go away, but everything will go as planned, and the patient will leave the hospital without any undesirable outcomes, right? But in the hospital, there are many factors, what are called contributory factors, that influence the ability to stay on that optimal care path. And what happens is the non-routine events, which are just events that are undesirable or unwanted or surprising, can cause a deviation from optimal care. And that increases the risk of the outcome being less than optimal, some kind of adverse event or whatever. And so what we need to do in designing our systems and in working in them is be able to not only minimize the occurrence of non-routine events, but they're inevitable, but rather to detect them and intervene and help recover so that the patient goes back to the optimal care path. Okay? So that's safety concept one. Focusing on events and systems rather than errors is more likely to lead to worker engagement, to be involved in creating safety, event reporting, very important to understand what's going on in the system, and safety improvement. Let's look at safety concept 2. Focus on contributors and not causes. Traditionally, when an event occurs, they try and figure out what happened. And many people use what's called the Swiss cheese model. How many people, raise your hands, let's see who is understanding, have seen this picture, even if you don't fully understand it, maybe half. So this is how probably, I would guess, your hospital, when they do an event analysis, they show this picture and say, let's find the holes in the Swiss cheese. The way the Swiss cheese model works, let's see, I'll use this, is it says there are different layers of the cheese, different parts of the hospital. There's the sharp end, where the care happens, the clinicians are taking care of the patient. There's their equipment and tools they use, their policies, procedures, the local care environment, various things in the organization and the healthcare system. And each of these holes are those potential failure modes. And when an event occurs, holes line up to create an event trajectory that leads to the adverse event. So that's the model that James Reason introduced in 1990 and now says he wished he hadn't introduced it, because in healthcare we take it too literally. So what's wrong with the cheese? Why does it stink a little bit? Okay? Because it looks like a linear causal model. That is, this arrow goes in one direction, these events line up, they look like they're in order, okay? And so as a result, I'm going to go backwards here, the tendency is for people to say, well, let's focus at the far end, because if we block those holes, then it doesn't matter about the others, because they're thinking it's linear. But in fact, that's the least effective place to focus, because that's the clinicians who made the error at the end. And I'm going to give you an example in a little bit about why that's a problem. So the Swiss cheese model shows only one of many paths to failure. And you're doing it in retrospect, so it's potentially biased by hindsight bias and outcome bias. Subsequent failures in your system are likely to follow different paths. There might be the same hole at the end, maybe not, but it's going to be different. And as I said earlier, it promotes a tendency to focus on holes at the sharp end. So this is a better model. This is called the Nottingham wheel, and it was developed by Lawton and others maybe 10 years ago. And it shows slices of an onion that represent your healthcare system, with the outer slices being in yellow, the external environment, for example, the devices that companies sell to you, or the government regulations that constrain what you can do. The green is your organization, your hospital, the physical environment, the policies and procedures, the education that's available, the scheduling of patients. The blue is your local unit, so equipment on the unit and its availability, workload, supervision, and then the pink is the immediate context where the care occurred, such as what were the people doing the tasks, who else was there, the factors affecting the clinician. Were they sleep deprived? Were they fatigued? Did they get the training they were supposed to get? And then the center are what are called the active failures. These are the immediate errors or other things that the clinician did that was immediately associated with the event. So let me show you how this works with an actual case. Okay, so we'll see this in a minute again. So this is a medication error that led to a patient death, and it's very complicated, and I'm going to simplify it. There were many factors involved. And it's about an ICU patient who had to go to radiology for a PET scan. And radiology is quite distant from the ICU. When the patient gets to radiology, they say, I'm scared to go in the scanner. And so the radiologists call the physician up in the ICU and says, we need a sedative. So the physician gets on the computer and orders midazolam, which is a sedative. That's the generic name of that drug. And because the first nurse was now busy, that patient's original nurse was busy with another patient, another nurse was asked, who was also busy, but she was asked to go get that medication and take it down to radiology and give it to the patient. So she went to a computerized drug dispensing system and typed in VE for Versed, which is the trade name of the drug, which is what the other nurse said, hey, the patient needs Versed. So that's what she typed in. And the safety feature here is that only the patient, you put the patient's name in first, and only the patient's orders came up. But when she typed in VE, there wasn't an order. So she did what most nurses have to do at this hospital every day and override the safety feature to get the full formulary list. So she bypassed the patient order list, And the first drug that came up was VE vecuronium. Alphabetically, that's the first drug that appears, and that's a paralyzing agent. So she accidentally picked vecuronium. She looked at the vial but didn't see that it was wrong, put it in the bag, and took it down to radiology. So in radiology, they're in a hurry, they want to get going, and so she takes the drug out of the bag, she mixes it up, and she gives it to the patient. Now normally, when you give a sedative or a paralyzing agent, you monitor the patient. But because that wasn't a requirement in the medical record, the physician forgot to order monitoring, and the other nurse said, oh, if you're just giving her a milligram of midazolam, you don't need to monitor. Come on back because you have other patients to take care of. So she left. The patient stopped breathing, coded, and died the next day. Okay? So in the traditional view, if you were listening to this or analyzing, you say, well, that nurse made lots of errors, and those are the active failures in the center of the Nottingham wheel. She overrode the patient profile. She didn't confirm the drug's identity. She didn't notice that the drug was different and how it was mixed up. She failed to state a monitor, and she also didn't document. Okay? But if you do a full analysis, there are many, many other failure modes in this case. Okay? And so here, when you do this, then you can say, okay, now what can we do that's actually going to make a difference in future care? Okay? It requires a multi-layered approach to prevent future errors. So, safety concept 2, instead of blaming individuals at the sharp end, focus on system contributors that will guide interventions to more likely prevent future harm events. All right, safety concept 3, focus on success as well as failure. To introduce this concept, I want to move to commercial aviation. Okay? In a recent analysis of commercial aviation accidents over a 10-year period, there were 240 million flights, of which only 38 crashed, which is a incidence of 0.17 per 100,000, which is quite low. So yeah, commercial aviation is safe. But why is commercial aviation safe? Well, NASA did an analysis of voluntary reports of events from pilots, and they found that in 20%, 1 in 5 of all flights, there were anomalies that required the pilot to do something that, if they hadn't done, could have led to a crash. So there's far more going on than just the crashes. And if you only analyze the crashes, you won't get all that information. So the question that commercial aviation and NASA is doing is, what did those pilots do that was successful? And this is called Safety 2.0. So previous Safety 1.0, focus on errors. Safety 2.0, focus on success. And there's more to Safety 2.0. Safety 2.0 is about complexity. It says healthcare is complex, and it's best understood by the relationships between the many complex interacting parts. Think of the wheel with all those areas. Each of those have parts. Now, people are parts too. They're people at all levels in the organization, and they have to be part of the system. And those are the relationships you focus on, the relationships between people, between units, between people and technology. That's where everything happens. So by improving relationships and communication between these parts, people, devices, policies, etc., you're more likely to prevent future failures than if you just fix one part because of all these interactions. Second, and the reason this is important, is in your hospital, in this complex system, it's constantly changing. And the way it most commonly changes is that local units, the emergency department, for example, is busy every day trying to optimize to achieve its local goals, get all the patients through, take care of them well, despite all the pressures and conflicts and events. And this local optimization, in the absence of communication with all the other parts, creates systemic failure modes. Okay? So as a result, Safety 2.0 says safety isn't a property of the system, it's an activity of the system. It's what people do every day, locally and globally, to create safety. So in order to understand and improve that, we need to understand how clinicians successfully navigate the complex systems that they work in every day. And this really requires qualitative methods. You can't count how many errors occurred. You need to go and talk to clinicians, observe clinicians, talk to patients, and really analyze that qualitative data to get at the stories that tell you how the system is either safe or not safe. So safety concept 3 is use qualitative methods to understand how people make the system safer every day despite its complexity under both routine and abnormal conditions. All right, the next concept, number 4, is drift towards failure. So in every system, whether you're talking about commercial aviation or nuclear power or healthcare, safety is never the primary operational goal. In commercial aviation, it's about getting getting passengers from one point to another on time and making sure they pay their bills, right? And their baggage arrives too. Safety is a secondary aim. It's important, but it's not what they worry about every day. In healthcare, we have priorities too. We want to always be giving more care, reducing waiting lists. We want to decrease the cost of the care we deliver. We want to maintain the quality of the care. And so every day, system safety is degraded or eroded by these other more obvious, more conspicuous goals that push on us every day. Do more, go faster, spend less. So let me show you how this causes a problem with safety. So imagine you have an emergency department that is represented by this graph, that the way your managers might think about your emergency department. So on one axis is productivity, how many patients are put through and how good the care is. And this is lower and this is higher, so obviously there's a desire to go up. On this axis is the cost of delivering the care. Higher is over here, lower is there. The desire is to go that way, okay? Now safety is the third element, but we can't measure safety directly. We only know when things go bad, so we only measure unsafe. You're way down there. It's very safe. We want you to be more efficient, more productive, lower cost. We need to move you up there, okay? Well, some people may say, well, we're getting close to that boundary. But if nothing bad happens, people in the organization, especially the leaders, will say, I don't think that's the boundary. I think the boundary is out there. We can push harder. That's called drift towards failure. Thinking that you're less safe, more safe than you are, okay? And so the tendency when that happens is to push further, and then the risk of a failure is much higher, okay? Drift towards failure. So what do we need to combat drift towards failure? What we really need is a safety meter that sits there in the emergency department on the wall, and when it gets to unsafe, then people can say, wait a minute, it's unsafe, we can't do more, we need more nurses, we need better equipment, whatever it is. Unfortunately, desafortunadamente, no hay metro, see? That doesn't exist. So the only safety meter we have today is you, the clinicians and others working in the environment who can recognize that there are issues and speak up, okay? Speaking up is one of the most important things to advance safety in healthcare, because the people at the top don't know what the problems are. Only the front line, the sharp end people do. So safety concept 4 is that you prevent drift towards failure by being proactive, ever vigilant, and speak up for safety. So the last concept, number 5, is redesign systems, don't fix people. Now, I want to be clear what I mean by don't fix people. The system has to be designed to assure that every person working in it is ready, willing, and able to perform at an acceptable level. So people have to take their responsibility. The clinicians have a responsibility and accountability to function at a acceptable level, but the system can't be busy sabotaging them, okay? So I want to go back to the event that I told you about where bad things happened to the nurse who made those errors. And I will argue, as do many in safety, that that's exactly the wrong thing to do. So this nurse was audited, she was fired, she lost her license, and worst of all, criminal charges were brought up against her for criminally negligent homicide, and she was convicted and sentenced for these errors that she didn't intend to make, okay? She was a good nurse. She was so good that the other thing she was doing at the time that she was asked to go down and help was mentoring a junior nurse taking care of another patient. So she was obviously anxious about getting back to that. So there were all these other factors, but she became the scapegoat. Is there a word for that in Spanish? No? It's the person you blame for the situation so no one else has to take the blame. So how can we best address safety risks? I'm going to show you a figure about the way most hospitals deal with a problem when they detect it, like a medication error, okay? And this is called the risk mitigation hierarchy. It's, okay, you have a problem in your system, how do you deal with it? And the first ones are the most effective and the bottom ones are the least effective. So the best thing, as I've already told you, is to eliminate the design flaws. If you can't do that, you can incorporate constraints like the patient list that prevent you from doing something that's less safe. Although that one was allowed to be overridden because the system didn't work and nurses weren't getting the drugs they needed because the orders weren't getting written. Okay, the next level is to make the errors or potential failure modes more visible. The next thing is you can, and now we're getting into less effective ways, you can add warnings. Be careful. A common error is when you have a cart, like in the operating room with different drugs, is to reach in and grab a drug, and because it looks the same, the vial looks the same as another drug, you grab the wrong drug and you might not recognize it. A strategy that will not work is to put a label over the drugs that say, be careful, drugs look alike. The first thing that happens is people tear it out and then they ignore it, okay? The next thing is you can provide use training. It's not user training, it's use training, but the idea is you did something unsafe, let me show you how to do it safely. Well, you didn't do something unsafe because you were intentionally doing something unsafe. You did it for a lot of other reasons, and the strategy is to understand those reasons and design a better way, not to just tell you, give you training to tell you to be more careful or follow the procedure. You can limit who can do something. This device is only for interventional cardiologists, for example, but invariably other people try and do it. For example, there are now medical devices that are being used in the United States at home by patients and their families. They were never intended for that. Okay, that's called foreseeable misuse, but that doesn't work very well either. And the last thing is to accept the risks and just say, we'll deal with it. And expect the people in the organization, they know there's a problem, to deal with it. And that's actually often the most common thing. It's not going to happen again. People now know about it. They'll deal with it. But in fact, the problem, the reason the things at the bottom don't work very well is they rely on those same unreliable humans that you're trying to prevent from doing wrong things. So the least reliance on the individual in the moment ability of you as a clinician is to design the system so that it just doesn't happen. And the thing that most relies on you is to the training and the warnings and stuff. So why is it that most hospitals rely on the stuff towards the bottom? Because it's cheaper, it's faster, it's easier. It takes work to redesign systems. The way you do that is with human factors engineering, not just that I do a lot of human factors engineering. That's a discipline of engineering and psychology that studies and improves how humans interact with their built environment, with their tools, devices, and systems to enhance safety as well as effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. And it's been successfully applied in a wide range of domains, from aviation to healthcare to consumer products. And if you don't know anything about this, I recommend this book, which is in Spanish. You can read it in English too. The Psychology of Everyday Things, which is a very good, quite old, but very good introduction to the topic. So, to summarize Safety Concept 5, use human factors methods to design safer systems to create better conditions for people at the sharp end to be successful. All right, reviewing our 5 concepts. Focus on events, not errors. Focus on contributors, not causes. Focus on success as well as failure. Speak up to prevent drift towards failure. And redesign systems, don't fix people. So physicians and nurses and engineers and dietitians and everybody who works in the hospital, but particularly physicians and nurses, have unique training, knowledge, and skills. We are trained to be problem solvers and systems thinkers. We're comfortable with complexity. That's what we deal with every day. We know the systems we work in. So we're part of the solution. We have to be vigilant to notice when things aren't going the way they should, or to recognize ways in which we've had to deal with a situation that maybe someone else won't be able to deal with it successfully. Those near misses. We need to speak up and not be afraid to say, hey, there's a problem here. And our leaders need to be receptive to that, right? They can't punish the messenger. We need to be active participants in system redesign, even if it's just to say to others who've done the work, yeah, that looks good, or I think you should do that. And we have to take a broader view of our role and our impact in our hospital, in our unit, in the whole healthcare system, and in society, because we're this part of the solution, not part of the problem. Thank you very much. Gracias. Gracias por su atención. Ahora recibiré preguntas o comentarios en español. Por favor, hable despacio y Hector traducir para mí.
Thank you very much, Matt, for your brilliant conference. Tenemos un poquito de tiempo para preguntas. Si queréis las podéis hacer en español, intento traducirlas al inglés. Si tenéis alguna pregunta aquí en la audiencia para el profesor Matt, profesor Ramón.
I will try to make my question in English. We have now a very fast staff turnover. Nurses are changing every day, and today you have a nurse, tomorrow you don't have those people. The same happens with doctors and so on. So how can we focus on a new design of training and formation for our staff?
That's a great question. The question is, when you have staff turnover, when you have changing teams every day, how do you deal with that? And this is a nice introduction to the concept of high reliability organization. For example, aircraft carrier, they have rotations where new people come in all the time. So they've designed the system to be highly reliable despite that. And the way they do that is a whole bunch of things, but the most important for healthcare is, one, you make sure when someone new comes in that they're competent, they're adequately trained, etc. But more importantly, you design your systems so that people do the right things, even if they're new, even if they're they're not quite as experienced. So it's about system design to support changing roles. In addition, there's concepts of cross-training, cross-checking. What that is where other people are monitoring what each other are doing. The cross-training allows, if the new person doesn't quite get things done, someone else knows their job and will pitch in and help. And so we tend to do that informally in healthcare often, but we need to design the system to be able to do it formally now that there's so much turnover. Thank you.
¿Más preguntas?
Do you know what changes the doctors make, or in the case of the nurse, what changes did they make to prevent another case like that?
So that's another great question. It's I'll repeat the question. The question was, what changes did the hospital and the system make in addition to firing the nurse? And initially, they did do a root cause analysis. I don't like the term root cause because it implies that there's one final thing. And except for God, you can keep asking questions and you'll come to something else, usually beyond your ability to change, right? And so that's why we focus on contributory factors. They did an analysis, and then with a little bit of pushing from the government, they made a number of changes. It's too complicated to go into, but they changed policies, they changed procedures, they changed the automated dispensing unit, some of the rules in that. One of the things they changed is they required that you had to type in 5 letters before you saw any drugs. And I think that's a problem because that takes more time, and there already was a bottleneck at the computer system because it was slow. And so now it's even slower, which makes nurses do workarounds. You all know what a workaround is you're trying to get your job done, and the way you're told to do it doesn't work, and so you come up with another way to do it, and that becomes the way everyone does it, but the people at the top don't know that's how it's being done. So the workaround was nurses started hoarding medications in their pockets or whatever, and then there's no safety. So they made changes. I'm not sure we're that much safer. Thank you.
¿Más preguntas, doctor Ocio?
Thanks a lot. So our quality control system is mainly based on errors, I think. It's errors, quasi-errors, incidences. So I like the concept of focusing on success, but can you elaborate, how can we do that in the real life? Because an error triggers something to change, but how can we focus on success, and how can you elaborate on that?
So the question is, what are some methods to focus more on success? So success happens a whole lot more often in the hospital than failure, right? So you just have to watch. Now, from a practical standpoint, near misses or near hits, depending on your perspective, is a good first step towards understanding success, because they are about how I heroically prevented this thing from happening, or how I was lucky, one or the other. And understanding the difference between heroism or active prevention and luck is important, and that's a way to collect information, near misses. And people are more likely to be willing to report how they were successful at preventing an event than how they made an error. In the non-routine event format, which is what we do, is we ask people to describe anything that happened that deviated from their view of optimal care for that patient in that moment. So we have a series of questions that we ask a clinician after the care is over. We do it with patients too, by the way. was there anything that you thought wasn't optimal? Was there anything that surprised you? So there are a variety of trigger words to get them to tell us a story. Fundamentally, it's all about stories and analyzing those stories with qualitative methods and then collating them with ethnographic methods. See? Yes. So, I forgot, and Nacho was kind enough to remind me, that that you have excellent experts in human factors engineering available to you, and that you can go to them and they can help design better systems to improve care. And that's several of the projects that I'm doing at HVV this year are specifically around those things. Sorry, Nacho. I told you I'd probably forget. All right.
Dr. Rivera.
Maybe we have time for one more question.
Thank you very much. Excellent talk, very interesting. You have mentioned how when a health system try to save cost too much, sometimes the events is going to happen. And sometimes the events have a very high cost. So probably if you try to improve the safety, you have to use money, but you are going to save the problems. Probably it's cost effective, safety clearly cost effective. Have you measured this?
So there's actually a book called, I've forgotten the author, called The Business. The question is, how can we argue for safety more effectively because it costs money to do things, and money is what the leaders of the hospital have to look at, and so you have to make the argument that by doing these preventative things, in the long run it'll be cheaper, right? And it's the same thing, by the way, with preventive health, right? It's a tough sell, or it has been, but now we recognize that paying for disease, to treat disease, is far more expensive than getting people to stop smoking and not eat too much and not drink too much, etc. All right, safety is the same way. There's a book called The Business Case for Safety, and there have been a number of studies that show that it's more cost effective. But for you, what you need to do is take safety initiatives you've done here and do the analysis after you've done them and show, here's what the bad events that happened before we did this, and here's how much those cost, and now we don't have any bad events. Here's how much this initiative cost. Look how much. Usually the return is anywhere from 3 to 10 to 1. So, but you have to do the work, and money talks. That has to be part of the safety conversation. Thank you. Great question.
Thank you for the incredible presentation. Just one question I would like to ask you. Many times, can you hear me?
Yes.
Many times there is a lack of instruments, of the means we need to do our job. Sometimes some things get old or broken and is not replaced. So what real room do we have to speak up? That's one of the 5 main points, and I consider it's important because, as you say, we are the first. We see the dangers to face the safety issue.
So, if I had had time, I would have made this point. Your question is, how do you speak up more effectively? Yes. So, if one person speaks up because they're the one brave person, then probably nothing's going to change because it's just one person. If all of the gastroenterologists speak up and say, hey, we have a problem, the scopes may not be clean or whatever it is, then you're more likely to have people listen. But by building relationships with the entire team, by the gastroenterologist being can have a mental model. We're all a team together with the nurses, with the technicians, with the anesthesiologists, and everybody speaks up together, and they say, this isn't safe. We need to do something. Then they'll listen. Because fundamentally, money talks, and productivity. And so if people, even if they don't say it, say, this is unsafe, we're going to stop the line. We're not going to do any more endoscopies until you fix this problem. The hospital, oh, no, we'll deal with it. Tell us how we can deal with it. So it's about the team together.
Okay, Dr. Galo.
Matt, muchísimas gracias. Una excelente presentación. Tu presencia aquí es una oportunidad para todos. Your presence here is a nice opportunity for all of us to work together on patient safety. And as you are an expert in human factor and ergonomics, could you say something about why in Spain we have not embraced this concept as you have done in the States? Because it's an excellent tool for changing things.
So I can't speak to all the reasons in Spain, but I can talk about what happened in the United States. And it's been a very slow process. I've been working in this field of human factors in healthcare for 40 years, almost, 30-something. And in the early years, in the 90s, nobody knew what human factors was, and nobody but a very few people were doing it. And anesthesia was one of the first specialties to really embrace it because our equipment was killing people. And so there was a reason to do it. One of the motivators in our country was the Food and Drug Administration recognized it was a problem and told device companies, you need to do human factors on your devices before we will approve them. And that has had a major effect on the adoption, because all medical devices have to have human factors engineering. So it built more people who were doing human factors in healthcare. Then what happened is the patient safety, the Institute of Medicine report patient safety, and people started asking, well, how do we do this? Is there anybody around who could help us make things safer? And the human factors people stepped up and said, we can apply our skills to healthcare. They were busy working in other fields, aviation, nuclear power, etc. So they started working in healthcare. And now only over the last 10 or 15 years have hospitals really adopted and said, we need a human factors engineer. And now in the United States, there aren't enough of them to go around. So they make really good money, which makes them expensive, so we need to train more. So you have to be patient here in Spain. B, the people who are doing human factors need to show that they can make a difference here at HUMB and in other hospitals and with the government and with industry. So not a easy fix, not an easy answer, but it'll happen if people are deliberate.
Ok, yo creo que lo vamos a dejar aquí. Muchísimas gracias, many thanks.
Gracias.